privileged to have Orlando Wood on the show, a name famous and synonymous with modern marketing. Orlando is Chief Innovation Officer at System1, of course. Now, I would say that System1 has probably become, or at least becoming, the go-to methodology to understand and benchmark performance of advertising. And we'll come on to that in a lot more detail, but just a bit more about Orlando. Prior to System1, Orlando had, I think, about 12 years at Brainjuicer, another research institution. And then prior to that, 7 years at Simon Godfrey Associates. And I have to say, Orlando, when I looked that up, I couldn't find too much about it, so you'll have to fill in the blanks there.
Be delighted.
But he joined System1 5 years ago and has, I suppose, become more and more famous, particularly through the work he's done in terms of publishing the book Lemon, How the Advertising Brain Turned Sour, about the decline in creativity in advertising and a big dip into the psychology and science of advertising. And then more recently, in 2021, the book Lookout, about creativity and effectiveness in a changing world. Orlando's a sharp lad. He's got a master's in research studies from Oxford University. So you're going to get a pretty punchy view of the world, and particularly the world of advertising. He's also an honorary fellow of the IPA. So Orlando, the surprise bit that you didn't know about yourself was that I just asked John Evans from System1 to say a few words about who is Orlando.
Oh.
So this is what he said. Orlando is without doubt one of the legends of our industry. I've never met anyone with his unique ability to see how history, culture, and neuroscience have shaped how advertising works, and to provide so much clarity on how to do great work. He also brings wit, charm, and rich insight to every conversation, and I have watched on countless occasions how people are gripped what he has to say. Unsurprisingly, he is also a talented artist and pianist, as well as being irritatingly young and good-looking for his age. He's a true gentleman. So there you go.
What a decent type. Well, thank you, John. That's
and we forgot to say that if you do want to do a little sort of piano virtuoso thing mid-interview, then you're of course welcome. But
sadly, the piano's downstairs, so no, that's not going to be possible. But
another time. But for
another
now,
time.
You're very welcome, Orlando. Great to have you on the show.
Got off there lightly. Well, fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, look, it's an absolute pleasure, Orlando. And to be honest with you, I mean, I was hoping for an intermission break of a little piano sort of prelude, but of course not to happen today. It could have been a first. I'm sure.
Yeah, there are clips on YouTube. If you search for Orlando Wood piano, you'll probably find a few things there that might interest you.
But you know what's interesting? Mark failed to mention one thing. Of course, he mentioned the fact that you studied research methods at Oxford. But what he failed to mention that those research methods were in the 17th century French literature.
Gosh, you've done your research.
Isn't that amazing? I found it fascinating.
Well, it was very interesting. It does sort of prefigure some of the work I've been doing recently, because I was looking at the changing literary styles and cultural styles in the 17th century through the work of a chronicler called Tallemant des Rills. And he collected stories and poems and bits of things. He was a scurrilous gossip merchant. And over a period of about 50 years in his manuscript, you can see the changes in literary style, changes in culture, changes in society, actually. And it occurred to me, not long ago, that of course, this is what I've been doing with advertising in the book Lemon more recently. And, it was perhaps not so strange a thing to have been doing, that study of that far away, long ago time.
And it reminds me of that classic quote by Steve Jobs, right? You can only join the dots in hindsight.
Yes.
This certainly seems like one of those moments.
I think you're right.
Oh, amazing. Look, Orlando, I'm going to go right into the depths and just sort of ask, Mark alluded to the work that you've done both at System1, but more specifically on how the brain and chemistry works, particularly from an advertising perspective, and how advertisers can get underneath the thinking of their consumers. So I would love for you just to do a slight explanation for us of some of your key findings and thoughts at the moment on that area.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I've been looking at advertising and how it works for a number of years, and worked with the IPA quite a lot with their data and Peter Field. But I've been applying, I suppose, thinking from psychology and neuroscience to try to understand what it is that captures attention, what it is that elicits an emotional response, what it is that puts things in long-term memory, all of which are, you know, hugely important for advertising, and particularly brand building advertising, the sort of advertising that I think we need to be spending more on, not less, today in this digitally disrupted post-pandemic world. So you know, that's the sort of what I do. And I've looked at the work of a number of psychologists, of course, Daniel Kahneman, and his ideas about the two modes of thought, the modes of judgment and thought. So System 1 and System 2, so fast thinking or slow thinking. And I think that's very important and helps to set out, you know, the three things that I think marketeers should be thinking about when they're, you know, trying to establish and build their brand. And that's, in my language, I suppose, fame, feeling, and fluency. So you need to get your brand thought of first. You know, you need to be in the room when people are thinking about which brand to go with, what product to use. Fame, and the way to do that is, and that's, you know, mental availability, and that's coming to mind quickly, coming to mind very fast. And, you know, people learn very gradually over time in order to make very quick decisions in the moment. And that's what System 1 really is. And that's, you know, what advertisers, I think, need to remember. So you start to, what goes into long-term memory? What raises this sort of mental availability? Well, two other things, feeling and fluency. So feeling is, you know, the affect heuristic. So being able to make a judgment really quickly based on, you know, sort of whether you feel it's good or not. And that answers a more difficult question, as Daniel Kahneman would say, you know, is this right or not? And then, you know, this last one, fluency. So how quickly does something come to mind? How easy is it to process? How distinctive is it? How recognizable is it? Because the things that, you know, if you can create those assets, those characters, those I suppose shortcuts, all of these things are mental shortcuts for people, the more likely it is you're going to be chosen. So that you know, is that work looking at Daniel Kahneman and others, Gerd Gigerenzer and others, that sort of led to this idea that, you know, we're fast and frugal thinkers, and we trust these easy, quick decisions often, you know, over, and we don't deliberate for a long time, you know, in many cases. And I think that's the heart of System 1. And then, you know, over recently, I've been looking at the work of another neuroscientist called Ian McGilchrist, and a philosopher, and he, you know, has some incredible insights on how the brain attends to the world. So looking at attention, looking at the way that we react to the world around it, and the way that we think, the way that we view things, you know, will influence, you know, obviously our kind of outcomes. And he's the expert, I think, on brain lateralization, the two halves of the brain, and how they attend to the world. But perhaps more of that in a minute.
Well, Orlando, you've given everyone a sort of a toe in the water to what it all entails. I have to say, being ad of the week, System 1 ad of the week, is an accolade in marketing that people, you know, aspire to. A bit like the sort of campaigns ad of the week.
Very nice of you to say so.
But it's based in science, and I think that's a key point. For those who are listening back, you won't see that I've got a couple of the Direct Line advertising characters on the wall behind me, and System 1 was brilliant because it showed that even though we had amazing success with the Winston Wolfe campaign, every execution that we've done since with the Transformers, and we're on it with Bumblebee and Robocop, etc., was better than any of the preceding, which was a surprising finding and very helpful inside the organization, just to add a bit of grit to the conversation about what we're trying to do. So I'd just like to build on what you said, to say, how have you turned that into a methodology to prove advertising effectiveness?
Yeah, well, we've been working on this for a fair number of years, and we've developed a way of, I suppose, gauging emotional response to any ad that we test. In fact, we test every ad that airs in the UK and the US on TV as a matter of course. So we've got an enormous database, 70,000+ ads. And we show people an ad and we ask them how they feel about it by using a set of faces, pictures, based on the work of a psychologist called Paul Ekman. 7 basic emotions, happiness, fear, surprise, disgust, anger. There are probably others, and neutrality. It could be that people feel nothing after they've seen it. And that's, emotion is really important because it orientates our attention, first of all, but it also helps to put things in long-term memory. And it helps us, as I said, to make decisions quickly between things in future. And so what brand building, advertising in particular, needs to do is all of those things. And so emotion is the best proxy for effectiveness. And we've linked emotional response and the ability of a campaign to grow market share, looking at market share data and over the years, and that's what our star rating system is based on, from 1 star through to 5 star. Very simple kind of grading system. And you want to be performing better than your competitors on that measure for your in your advertising. And because we measure every ad, we kind of know in any category, how any given company is performing. And what you find that works well, of course, in emotional response terms, is characters, the living, something emerging from the scene that's slightly out of the ordinary. This time, things unfolding in real lived time, as opposed to short, sharp cuts. Music rather than rhythmic soundtracks, and the sort of betweenness, the connection between characters on the screen, as opposed to this sort of me telling you, what to think and do. And actually over the year, what my work has shown is that we've moved away a bit from that kind of work in the last 15 years or so, and that we've moved towards a kind of more mechanistic style of advertising, with words on the screen, short, sharp cuts, highly rhythmic, this kind of stare at the camera, the loss of betweenness, loss of music, many of those things that really connect with people.
Orlando, can I just delve into that for a second and
Yeah.
ask, why do you think that is the case? Because that seems to be this constant tussle in marketing and an endless debate, which I'm sure you probably have every day, which is the difference between performance marketing advertising and brand building advertising. And why do we feel that the pendulum is sort of swinging in that direction then? And what do you think, therefore, is what do you think you would like to see happen to get back to that major effectiveness?
Yeah. Well, it's a very big question, Rich. I've written 2 books on it, and I've drawn on the work of Ian McGilchrist, who is a brilliant neuroscientist I mentioned earlier, and he talks about how the left and the right hemispheres have different modes of attention. So this is the same in people, mammals, birds. We just talk about birds for a minute, because that's probably quite a helpful way to make the case. In birds, the left hemisphere of the brain controlling their right eye is what's being used when they're pecking around on the ground, trying to pick up those grains of food, to identify what they are, whether they can eat them or not, categorize them. Really narrow attention, very narrow beam. And then the right hemisphere controlling the left eye in birds is broad and vigilant in its attention. It's looking around it. It's making sure that it doesn't become someone else's lunch. It's open to novelty and unusual things. And it's the right hemisphere of the brain in birds, but in people too, that presents the world to us. It's got this broad beam attention. And what I think's been happening over the last, sort of 15, 20 years, but certainly in this digital age, particularly, kind of acutely in the last 5 years, is that our attention has been gradually narrowing. We're looking down and in at our mobile devices. We're starting to lose this broad beam attention. We're becoming left brain dominant, and that brings to the fore different styles of thinking which like to categorize things, people. It's very linear, it's very literal. It can't bear ambiguity, it can't deal with metaphor or humor. The right hemisphere is what tells the difference between a joke and a lie. And the left hemisphere is very rigid, it's very fixed, very brittle. Anger lateralizes to the left hemisphere as well. Also, left hemisphere dominance is associated with addiction, I should say, too. So it's very goal orientated. And we've lost this sort of other way of being, which is more associated with the right hemisphere. And you can see it in culture. You can see it in advertising. So when you see those words on the screen, by the way, words, language is one of the things that is predominantly in the left hemisphere, although the right hemisphere has important contributions to make. Words on the screen, short, sharp cuts, because the left hemisphere has no bearing of live time. It cuts things, atomizes time. Whereas the right hemisphere is all about live time. It's really much better at space and depth, appreciation. So in advertising, things have become flat. They've become word focused. They've become very rhythmic. They've become quite self-conscious, which is what the left hemisphere really is. The right hemisphere is very self-aware. And we've lost some of that humor, and we've lost the metaphor that we used to have, metaphors which are helpful for structuring long-term campaigns. The left hemisphere is more impetuous. It's less likely to, take the long view. It's not very good at looking back either. It can't deal with the past. It's a massive cultural change that we're going through. And in my books, I draw parallels with, about 1900, 1905, massive technological leap then. And also, 1500 with the printing presses and everything that they brought with them. We've seen hints of what we're going through now, I think, in culture in previous eras. And you can see it in the art of those periods, and you can see it in the art and advertising and culture of today too.
Fascinating, Orlando. I think you've just given everyone a mini masterclass in the way the brain works.
Well, thank you.
I'm gonna take a leap here and try and apply it to you. So,
oh gosh,
strikes me that you're part of running a business, System1, and there's a cadence and a delivery and a throughput, and probably quite sort of left brain. But at the same time, you're out there foraging for new and original thought, writing books, going to be a bit. So I don't know, maybe it's an oversimplification, but how do you apply your thinking around the brain to your world,
to my world? Well, to my work, I can tell you a bit about that. And I suppose that, there are, it does require a different style of, thinking. I said this recently to someone that, if I go for lunch with some friends, creative friends, we may all have a sort of agenda in our minds, but we don't tackle it in a 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of way. We let the conversation flow, and you give yourself time to enjoy the company of others, and let the sort of agenda emerge, and you get to better results as a result. You tackle things obliquely, and sometimes you have to hold many thoughts and many ideas at once in your mind, and you just let them sort of settle, and gradually over time they connect, and you end up with something new. John Cleese talks about, what are the 5 things that are needed for creativity? And he says it's time, space, time, confidence, and humor. And it does take time to, as he puts it, just to let your mind rest up gently against the subject. And you just have to keep sort of reading around, talking to people, have multiple conversations, at once. Just trust yourself that something is going to come of what you're doing. And eventually, it does. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen the Beatles Get Back documentary on Disney Plus, but I mean, it's a really long documentary, but absolutely brilliant. I think everyone should be every C-suite member of every company should be forced to watch all, whatever it is, 8 hours of it, because when you watch it, you get this sense that, but they're just messing about most of the time. What they're doing, that's the important bit, because, it looks like, I mean, a lot of the time they're doing covers of other people and just playing with each other. And, they'll something will emerge, there'll be a melody or something, or a set of chords that come out of something. And then, at first the words don't come. It's sort of blah, 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 I think McCartney, yesterday with scrambled eggs, wasn't it? The first lyrics. The words don't really matter, but the music comes, and then, it all just somehow comes together. And that is what creativity, I think, is about. If it's anything, it's the emergence of something, as channeled, I think, by the right hemisphere, this broad and type of attention. So I don't know if that helps, but I suppose you kind of just have to trust that something will come, and people don't like to hear that. The left brain doesn't like to hear that very much. It's, what on earth are you doing? What's going on? We need to see your processes. We want to see how you're going to get from A to B to C to D. That's not how creativity really works.
It's just a follow-up question then is you hit the nail on the head that that requires a lot of trust to allow people / marketers the freedom
and space
and indeed their agencies the space time to play. So is that why we're losing that a bit, because the decline in trust?
I think the digital world has sped things up, hasn't it? And it's removed place in a way. It's removed difference of place, and you see that in the global ad, which sort of is supposed to work everywhere but works nowhere particularly well. It's sped things up, and it's forced us into ways of working, where we're sat at our desk with our headphones on most of the time in open plan offices where we're crushed together tightly. Adrian Holmes, the creative, great creative, who I've worked with, says, 3 things have changed. One is that, we've got less time, first one. The second is lunch. Lunch has gone, which is a sort of free time for conversation, ideas, and to understand your client and what's going on. And the third one is the door. The door has disappeared on the creative's room. Everyone's in open plan offices, and the door gives you a space to mess about, be silly, try things that you can't really do in an open plan office. So, there have been a lot of changes in not just, technology, but I think the way that we are in the office.
I love that. I love your analogy of lunch, by the way. That was incredible. It's incredible. And so time, lunch, and the door as well. A lovely follow-on sort of key phrases there. And I wonder, and I just wonder if, as a consequence, and I'm sure there's no doubt you'd have seen the advert that I'm about to refer to, but this for me is sort of the antithesis of some of the things you're talking about, which is the Super Bowl Coinbase advert.
Oh, yes.
Which sort of broke the internet, as it were, as they say. And I love just to get your thoughts. So I'm going to be devil's advocate for a second then, right? Because clearly that was a super successful ad. And so then why do we need to have the fame, feeling, and fluency and frequency rather, when you've got a Coinbase ad where you just stick a QR code on there for a minute?
Well, it's highly disruptive, isn't it? In that of all places to put your advertising, and it's highly transactional. Actually, it's it reminds me very much of how the left brain works. It's like it's an engineering solution, isn't it? Let's put the QR code up there. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when that it should, and great, I think it's great to try, wonderful to try these things. Whether it will result in the memory structures required to create, lasting salience for the brand is another matter. It's more of a kind of response ad, really. It's the ultimate response ad. It's not a brand building ad, and it kind of assumes an interest in a way in whatever this thing is that's being flashed up on the screen, and many people will have done it and have done it. So I think it's a very different way of it's the purest form of response ad, isn't it? It's a very different way of doing marketing, and response and performance and activation advertising is all very important. But it tends to work better when you have a strong brand, and when you've created it, when you have very strong brand building advertising alongside it.
Essentially it was a stunt, wasn't it? It's not particularly campaignable, something that they could be famous for. There was another one I saw. It was a Neom, not to be confused with Neon, have launched NFTs through physical vending machines. You go to a vending machine and you buy it with your credit card through a physical, like you buy a Snickers bar or a can of Coke, and inside is a capsule with a QR code to buy NFTs. Now that's not a brand strategy. It's not a distribution strategy. It's a stunt.
Yes.
So at the other end of the spectrum, what's the very best ad you've ever scored through the System1 approach?
Oh goodness!
What are some of the bangers?
Some of the bangers. Well, in recent times, the Aldi Kevin the Carrot ads have done very well. Characters doing things. We going back. Perhaps the first ad that we tested that was off the charts was of course the Cadbury Gorilla ad, and whilst everyone else was sort of scratching their heads a bit, it was amongst the public, it was, wow, this is, it's kind of random, but it was extremely strong. And over the years, we've looked at John Lewis ads, so Monty the Penguin, in particular, I think was very, very strong in the way that connected with the general public. So that, there are lots of examples. Anyway, Jonathan Warburton and the Warburtons ads, with the way that they've used a kind of a repeated scenario and a character in Jonathan Warburton, and that what I call a fluent device, one of these devices that keeps on running. Very effective. There are some examples. I like the Yorkshire tea work. That's tested very well as well. Sean Bean and others who've starred in that. But we've even tested advertising that goes back to the sort of 70s and 80s, and it still works well. So examples being the Water in Mallorca ad for Heineken, still scoring 4.8 stars, something like that. And the Hovis Boy on a Bike ad, 5 stars still. Some of these things, they're connecting even today with new, younger audiences. So we mustn't think that these things don't have a shelf life.
Now, Orlando, you did mention any direct line ads or church
and direct line. Well, present company excluded.
We pre-agreed that we wouldn't do that. So
Exactly.
Obviously they're on the list, but
Of course they are. But I didn't want to. I thought it.
We agreed it would be inappropriate, didn't we? Wink, wink.
Yeah. Guys, I tell you what, the number of plugs that Mark has done in this show for direct line is unbelievable. There you go, Mark.
Well, it's superb work, Mark, as you know, and we weren't going to talk about it.
Exactly.
Kidding. Right, guys, listen. Interestingly, I was at Festival of Marketing last week. Fantastic sessions that took place there, and I sat in a session. And I won't name the brand that was in there, but they talked a lot about the role of creative intelligence. And I suspect this is the coming together of sort of performance-based optimization with creativity and the sense that you can have a formula that streaks through creativity. And, if you have a certain person at this moment in time, and if you say this at this moment in time, and if you have this color car at this moment in time, and all that kind of stuff, advertising seems to work better than not. Has that been your experience, Orlando?
Well, I'd love to hear more about it. Well, I mean, there's some of the things you touch on there suggest, the right time, the right person, the right, how do you make it very personalized? I think there's a place for all of that, but to grow brands and establish brands, you do need reach. You need reach, and you need to be able to connect with as many people as possible. And those other things you mentioned, will be in support of that. But one of the questions I ask in my recent book is, with so much spend going to more targeted advertising and online advertising and even addressable TV, where is the stage for our brand building show? Where is this sort of, where are we going to do this? And that one of the it's relatively easy inverted commas to speak to people who will most likely be very receptive to your brand and product. The real challenge is trying to create work that will appeal to everyone, whether or not they're in the category, in the buying window for your brand. And that means advertising that entertains, basically advertising that creates an interest in the brand, in the product, not one that assumes it's already there. And that I think is the real challenge of advertising, the difficult job of brand building advertising, creating something that everyone's going to connect with in some way.
So Orlando, let's go back in time a little. What runs through everything you've said is an innate curiosity to join dots, to find original thinking, etc. Can you say where you think that innate curiosity comes from in your development?
Yeah, well, I think there are a few things. I'm interested in people, I suppose. Some people are interested in things and mechanisms and machines. I suppose I'm interested in people and what makes them tick, how this manifests itself in advertising. I've always loved advertising. I'm talking to my dad, as I was little, about the great ads we loved. And trying to explain people is much more difficult, but actually very rewarding, than trying to explain how things work. And we're not things, we are complex creatures. So what makes us laugh? I love talking about humor and what it is. I mean, it's very difficult to define. I've had to go. That is very interesting and very useful, it seems to me, if you're trying to connect with an audience. As Jeremy Bullmore once said to me, if someone laughs, it's a sign that a connection's been made. So there's I think I'm interested in people and how they react to things, how they relate to things, and I'm interested in finding new ways of talking about I suppose the way that marketing works, and ways which actually most people find they can understand intuitively, but probably haven't had articulated in a scientific or way, or in a way that is easy to grasp. And I hope I'm doing that. So you kind of, I think you need something to press up against as well. So people often need something to push against, and you need to feel quite passionately about what you're doing to give you the energy to explore and try things. And I would also say, don't miss, don't feel that intuition has no place, because intuition is really important. If you feel that there is something here, that's how many great scientific discoveries are made, except that they are post-rationalized often afterwards. But it's often intuition or accident, or that where great things come from. So don't you always need to put intuition, trust your intuition. If you feel that there's something here that needs exploring, go for it.
Amazing. By the way, I just love what you just said. If someone laughs, a connection has been made. Fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. And it's so true, isn't it? When you're in a room and suddenly, you have that spark and you just get taken out of the moment of perhaps a serious conversation by some sort of anecdote that someone pulls out on you. And it changes the entire atmosphere, and it changes the entire dynamic
it does.
In that room.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that, Wittgenstein said, if you saw someone laughing, two people laughing on a bus, and you were totally, you'd never seen people before, and you just saw you an alien, you sort of landed, you'd wonder what on earth was going on. What's this sort of strange, explosion, that you see when people laugh. But it is, it's a sense that a connection's being made.
It's amazing. I just had to follow up on that, because you talked about the 7 different types of emotions that one can use. And I just wonder, in your mind, and sort of going back to the role of fame campaigns, is there a hierarchy of emotion? Because it feels like, and sometimes, you've got, I don't know, people using the sense of humor versus shock versus tear jerkers. But it feels like certainly at Christmas time, there's a lot more tear jerkers than there are sort of shock, fear, and laughable moments. So I just wondered if there's, does one emotion over-index in becoming better than others?
Well, we place a great weight and great store in happiness. So how you feel at the end of the ad, because when it comes to memories, we tend to prioritize good things, things that made us feel good. They go into long-term memory much more than negative experiences and emotions. And we found that that's the one that predicts, market share gain the best. Not to say that you can't or shouldn't use some of the other emotions to get there. So I mentioned John Lewis's Monty the Penguin ad earlier. Well, there's a great deal of sadness in that before the resolution at the end, and that's what storytelling is, isn't it? There needs to be some sort of grit in the oyster often, so that you sort of feel you've sort of been through something. So that I think is a surprise, and happiness in particular, I think is useful. Something happening, emerging from the scene that's slightly out of the ordinary, unexpected, juxtapositions, combinations. A scenario that's perhaps familiar but changed slightly. Specsavers, should have gone Specsavers. It's a great example of a fluent device. These things, these are the things that connect and are really important.
Well, Andy, you talked about intuition, and some of my most enjoyable moments have been where the hairs have been standing up on the back of my neck, in receiving creative work. Artificial intelligence. So I remember seeing a presentation a couple of years ago of an AI produced an as effective ad, apparently, as a human director and team. I think it was for chewing gum in China or something. Now you are codifying successful advertising. You're kind of building rules. What do you think about the prospect of AI being involved in advertising development?
Oh gosh. Well, I remember we have tested an AI ad, and it did test as well as it was for a car brand, and it tested as well as most car ads. But I think that was more of a reflection on the rest of the category than it was the ad itself. I think I sort of hate to think that my work will lead to sort of a painting by numbers approach. I sort of want people to absorb what I've written, and then just sort of instinctively sort of feel what's the right way to go. Could AI? I'm sure AI or augmented intelligence, we should probably call it, because I think it can probably help. It can help serve up examples. It can help serve to show what other people might have done. It can help to serve up inspiration, I think. But I think ultimately the end product needs to have a person in it involved, someone who has experienced the world, who knows what people are about, who is connected with people, who knows something of the culture in which it will be received. All of those things are essential for advertising to work. And I think it's going to be very difficult to create hugely effective, certainly brand building work, using a computer alone, at least at the moment.
So Orlando, we've talked a lot about fame. We've talked a lot about feeling. I'd like to just move a little bit onto frequency.
Fluency was my third F.
Sorry, fluency.
Yeah, this distinctiveness, ability to recognize things quickly.
Forgive me. So in which case, I do want to stick with my word though, for the second, because clearly to get ingrained in memory structures, you need to constantly be reinforcing the message. And so to what extent, what role does that play? And do you see that there is a potential, at what point do diminishing returns sort of play out, or is there an optimal sort of time, place, I don't know, thought around how to kind of hone in on frequency?
Yes, I think there are advertising campaigns tend to wear out in the boardroom more quickly than they do amongst the general public, assuming they're any good and they're liked by the general public in the first place. So they tend to be binned off when before their time often. Right. And certainly when you've got a long running, you need a bit of time to establish these things. I mean, they tend to, very good at advertising with characters and interesting situations and dialogue, and that kind of brand building advertising can work and does work instantly, but it also takes time to establish itself amongst the population, so they start talking about it. So they might even start using a sentence or two from the ad, simples. So it takes time. It's funny enough, I was at Hampton Court recently, and actually probably a couple of years ago now, and I saw someone sit in the throne there's a sort of throne, a pretend throne in the Great Hall, and he sat down and he sort of went like this, dilly dilly. And it's of course the Budweiser campaign where they say dilly dilly, and there's always the king in the throne at the front there. So these things still, advertising is still, part of the cultural language, vernacular. But I think it takes time for these things to establish, and broad reach, and time to really get into your stride. And the challenge then is keeping it fresh. How do we have an idea that keeps giving? And that's where I suppose the fluent device, as I describe it, comes in. A bit like Snickers, you're not you when you're hungry. That I suppose idea that enables you to do something again and again and again, but in slightly new and different ways. Specsavers, I think, will be another good example.
Compare the market, I guess.
Characters and compare the market. Yes. The way that's been going for 12 years now, at least.
Yeah.
There are great long-running campaigns exist and still exist, today. But the question is how to keep them fresh, and that's the creative part, I think.
You touched on a sort of a peeve point for me, in that the judgment about wear out tends to be a very rational one.
Yeah.
And as the world changed, many other things changed. So many indicating metrics mature and develop. And as you said it, the public tires much less quickly. So do you measure? Do you have a methodology to measure wear out based on System 1 thinking?
Well, one of the things that we have done is test, ads that have aired some time ago and retested them.
Mm.
So in fact, we did this during the pandemic. We looked at ads that had aired the year before and then tested them during the pandemic, because we were interested to know. We thought it'd be useful to know, do they still work, or has the environment changed so dramatically that things don't work as they did. And actually what we found was that it was these particular fluent devices, these characters or scenarios that are of this world but are slightly parallel to it, a bit like the meerkats, for instance. They're sort of, we can understand that this is still going on in meerkat world, and it's okay that the meerkat world doesn't, has nothing to do with the pandemic and carries on. They perform better, in fact, than they had before, because there is a sense of continuity. There is a sense of normality in a way in this strange world, and it was actually this mechanistic advertising that was not performing nearly as well as that. So there's a real sense that there is wear in as opposed to wear out for right-brained, animal, people, character focused work, and that it gets stronger, if anything.
This must be music to Mark's ears, given the pictures that he has behind him. It's incredible.
It can only get better, Mark. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Orlando, look, we are really coming to the end of time. Honestly, I think we could be talking here for the next couple of hours, but in interest of your time, let me just pitch up the last question. You've had and left such a huge impact already in this industry, and
well, thank you.
I just would like to ask, if there was a legacy that you were going to choose. Clearly, you're carving it out, but what would you want it to be?
Oh gosh, well, a legacy is something that is very important to me, actually, and it's wonderful to think that you might, on your short time on this earth, have contributed something to the world and to culture, and to, I suppose my legacy would be that would be to see changes in advertising, to see to have helped advertising agencies, to have helped clients to together come to a place where they create work that touches the general public, and that the general public in turn appreciates and acts upon. So I think to have some sort of effect, positive effect on culture, as Bill Bernbach said, advertising that, rather than brutalizing the world, enhances it, elevates it in some way.
Well, Orlando, I think you are well on the way towards your legacy, in fact.
Well,
so all power to you for that. So no, we are out of time. It has, as I've said a couple of times, been an absolute masterclass. And I think you have given a lot of stimulus to folks towards making ever better advertising. If I reflect on what we've talked about, I think you've talked about fame, feeling, and fluency, left brain, right brain, a number of constructs which help to codify some of the ingredients of good advertising. Brackets, never to be automated through AI. That's not the point of the codification exercise. But beyond that, I think you gave us some more generalizable insights into the way that we work as humans. I particularly loved the point about needing patience for creativity, and just that thought, trust yourself that something will emerge. I think that's quite profound, and not only in advertising, let's be honest. The role of intuition, backing yourself in your judgment, and going for things that may feel slightly incongruous. And then more than anything, we are people, we are complex, we are not things. And we do well never to forget that. So we didn't get any piano in the end.
Oh, sorry about that.
It was poorer for that, but it was still brilliant.
Oh, thank you so
much. Thank you, Orlando. And in a world where you say we need to hold many thoughts and ideas in our minds, I think you've given us a few things to think about. So thank you for your time this morning.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Orlando. And just for final note from me really is, is I'm going to use my right brain for a second. And the anecdotes that you talked of, time with your dad, watching adverts, the lunches that you have,
Yeah.
keeping the door closed, to just play around as the Beatles did.
Wonderful.
All of those things, you know, you lived and breathed the thinking that you infuse in your advertising. But all those anecdotes are the things that really stayed with me. And it's just such an